I was halfway through my morning coffee when I heard the sickening crunch of metal against metal right outside my townhouse window in Scottsdale, Arizona. The sound made my stomach drop because I knew exactly what it meant. Someone had just hit my Honda Accord, the one I'd parked perfectly inside the lines of my designated spot the night before. I rushed to the window and saw a white Lexus SUV with its front bumper pressed against my passenger side door, and behind the wheel sat Patricia Henderson, the HOA president who'd made my life a living hell since I moved into Sunset Ridge Estates 6 months ago. My name is Harrison Martinez, and I'd bought this townhouse thinking it would be a peaceful place to start my life as a newly single 32-year-old software developer. The property had seemed perfect during the showing. Modern amenities, close to work, reasonable HOA fees. What the realtor conveniently forgot to mention was that Patricia Henderson ran the homeowners association like her own personal fiefdom, and she had a particular vendetta against anyone who didn't kiss her ring. I grabbed my phone and rushed outside in my sweatpants and t-shirt, not even bothering with shoes. The Arizona morning sun was already heating up the pavement as I approached the scene. Patricia was climbing out of her SUV, her blonde, highlighted hair pulled back in that severe ponytail she always wore, her lips pursed in that expression of perpetual disapproval I'd come to know too well. "Patricia, what the hell happened?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. "You just crashed into my car." She turned to look at me with those cold blue eyes, not a trace of guilt or concern on her face. Instead, she crossed her arms and said something that made my blood boil. "Your vehicle was parked illegally in this spot. I was simply trying to navigate around it when you forced this collision by having your car where it shouldn't be." I blinked at her, certain I'd misheard. "Are you serious right now? This is my assigned parking spot, number 17, the same spot I've parked in every single day since I moved in. According to HOA Regulations Section 4.3, all vehicles must be parked within the designated lines and no closer than 6 inches from the curb marker," Patricia said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your vehicle was clearly over the line by at least 3 inches. I have photographs." "Photographs from when?" I demanded. "From before or after you smashed into my car?" "I document all violations," she replied primly, pulling out her phone. "I noticed your infraction yesterday evening during my routine patrol and plan to issue a citation. This morning, when I was performing my duties as HOA president and inspecting the property, your illegally parked vehicle created a hazard that resulted in unavoidable contact." The sheer audacity of her lie left me momentarily speechless. I walked around to examine the damage. Her Lexus had a minor scratch on the front bumper, barely noticeable. My Accord, however, had a massive dent in the passenger door, the paint scraped off in long gouges, and the side mirror hanging by its wires. "Patricia, there are cameras all over this complex," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "The footage will show exactly what happened. You were driving too fast around the corner and hit my parked car. Just admit it and let's get insurance involved like normal people." She lifted her chin. "The cameras will vindicate my position entirely. In fact, I'll be filing a claim against your insurance for the damage you've caused to my vehicle through your negligence." "My negligence? I wasn't even in the car." "Negligent parking is still negligence," she said. "I expect you to take full responsibility and cover all repair costs. Additionally, you'll be receiving a fine of $200 for the parking violation, plus $50 per day until your vehicle is moved to a compliant position." I felt my face getting hot. "You have got to be kidding me. You just hit my car and now you're threatening to fine me." "I don't threaten, Mr. Martinez. I enforce community standards." She tapped something on her phone. "I'm sending you formal notice right now. You have 24 hours to respond and arrange payment, or the fines will increase to $500 per day as per escalation protocols." "There's no way that's legal," I shot back. "And there's no way insurance or the police will see it your way." Her smile was razor thin. "I've been HOA president for 8 years, Mr. Martinez. I know exactly what I'm doing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting to prepare for." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in bare feet next to my destroyed car, my coffee getting cold inside my house. I took several photos of the damage from every angle, including shots that clearly showed my car was parked properly within my spot. Then, I called the non-emergency police line to file a report. The officer who arrived 45 minutes later was a young guy named Officer Ramsey who looked barely old enough to shave. He took statements from both of us, examined the scene, and made notes on his tablet. Patricia maintained her story with impressive conviction, even showing him her phone with photos she claimed were taken the previous evening showing my car supposedly over the line. I couldn't see the photos clearly from where I stood, but I suspected she doctored them somehow. "This appears to be a civil matter between you and your insurance companies," Officer Ramsey said after finishing his report. "Both parties claim the other is at fault. I'd recommend contacting your insurance providers and letting them sort it out." "What about the HOA fine she's threatening me with?" I asked. "Can she actually do that?" He shrugged uncomfortably. "HOA regulations are a civil matter, sir. If you believe the fine is unjust, you can challenge it through the proper HOA channels or seek legal counsel. I can't intervene in private association business." Patricia looked triumphant as the officer left. I went back inside and immediately called my insurance company, State Farm. The representative, a woman named Jennifer who sounded sympathetic but professional, explained that they'd need to investigate the claim and that I should get an estimate for repairs. "The other party is claiming I was at fault," I explained. "She's the HOA president, and she's threatening to fine me for parking violations that don't exist." "We'll investigate thoroughly," Jennifer assured me. "Get multiple estimates if possible and document everything. If the other party files a claim against you, we'll handle that as well. In the meantime, you might want to request footage from any security cameras in the area." That was my next call. I contacted the property management company that handled the day-to-day operations for Sunset Ridge Estates. The office manager, a pleasant woman named Rosa, listened to my story with growing concern. "I can submit a request for the security footage," she said. "But I have to warn you, Mr. Martinez, Patricia has a lot of pull with the management company owners. She's gotten requests denied before." "Even if it's for something like this, an accident investigation," Rosa sighed. "I'll do what I can. Give me a few hours and I'll call you back." I spent the rest of the morning researching Arizona HOA laws and trying to understand my rights. What I learned was disturbing. HOAs in Arizona had broad powers to fine residents for violations, and the enforcement mechanisms were heavily weighted in favor of the association. However, fines had to be for legitimate violations clearly spelled out in the CC and Articles, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern the community. I pulled out my copy of the Sunset Ridge Estates CC and Articles and read through the parking section carefully. Section 4.3 did exist, just as Patricia had cited. But reading the full text made it clear that the 6-inch rule applied to parking near fire lanes and emergency access points, not regular assigned parking spots. For standard parking spaces, The only requirement was that vehicles be parked within the painted lines. I took more photos showing my car was definitely within the lines, despite the damage. My phone rang around noon. It was Rosa from the management office. "Mr. Martinez, I have some bad news. The security camera that covers your parking area has been malfunctioning for the past week. The footage from this morning is corrupted." "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "How convenient." "I know how it sounds," Rosa said quietly. "But I checked with the security company and it's documented. They've been trying to get authorization to repair it, but Patricia kept delaying approval because she said the repair costs weren't justified." Of course she did. I thanked Rosa and hung up, feeling the situation spiraling out of control. Without video evidence, it would be my word against Patricia's, and she had the authority of the HOA presidency behind her. That afternoon, I got the official notice from the HOA via email. It was written in formal, legal-sounding language that made my head hurt. The key points were clear enough, though. I was being fined $200 for violating parking regulations, with escalating daily fines until compliance. Additionally, Patricia had filed a formal complaint demanding I pay for repairs to her Lexus, estimated at $800. I drafted a response disputing the charges and requesting a hearing before the HOA board. According to the CC and Articus, I had the right to contest any fine or enforcement action. I sent the email and waited, trying to focus on my work. I was in the middle of debugging code for a client project, but my concentration was shot. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange sticker plastered across my car's windshield. It was an official HOA notice declaring my vehicle in violation and warning that it would be towed within 72 hours if the fines weren't paid. My hands shook as I peeled it off. This was getting insane. I called the property management office again. Rosa sounded distressed when she answered. "Mr. Martinez, I saw that notice. I'm so sorry. Patricia came by first thing this morning and demanded I put it on your car. I tried to tell her you'd requested a hearing, but she said the hearing doesn't suspend enforcement." "Is that true?" I asked. "I honestly don't know," Rosa admitted. "This is beyond anything I've dealt with before. Most violations are simple things like lawn maintenance or paint colors. I've never seen Patricia go after someone like this. Why is she targeting me?" The question burst out of me, fueled by frustration. What did I do to make her hate me so much? Rosa was quiet for a moment. "You bought the Hendersons' old unit," she finally said. "Patricia's ex-husband and his family. It was a nasty divorce 3 years ago. She had to buy him out of their house here, and he immediately bought another unit in the same complex just to spite her. After he moved out and sold to you, I think she sees you as a reminder of that situation." "So I'm paying for her failed marriage," I said incredulously. "That's completely deranged." "I'm not saying it's rational," Rosa said. "I'm just telling you what I've observed. Be careful, Mr. Martinez. Patricia doesn't let things go." Over the next few days, the situation escalated rapidly. Patricia filed a claim with her insurance company, Allstate, alleging that I was at fault for the accident. Her insurance company contacted mine, and suddenly, I was being treated like a fraudulent claimant. State Farm assigned an investigator to my case, a gruff-sounding man named Thomas, who made it clear he was skeptical of my version of events. "The other party has photographic evidence that your vehicle was improperly parked," Thomas said during our phone call. "She also has statements from 2 witnesses who corroborate her account." "What witnesses?" I demanded. "There was nobody else there when it happened. I was outside within seconds of the crash." According to the statements, a Mrs. Linda Watson and a Mr. Gregory Dunn Both observed your vehicle parked over the line the evening before the incident. I recognized those names. Linda Watson lived 2 doors down from Patricia and was constantly at her side during HOA meetings. Gregory Dunn was on the HOA board and voted in lockstep with every proposal Patricia made. They were her cronies, obviously lying to support her story. "This is a setup," I said. "She's manipulating the investigation. My car was parked properly. I have photos proving it." "Photos taken after the incident aren't conclusive," Thomas said. "The vehicle could have been moved or repositioned during the collision. Without security footage or independent witnesses, this is going to be a he said, she said situation. In those cases, we typically consider all available evidence, including any traffic violations or parking infractions." "Which is exactly what she wants," I said bitterly. "She's using her position as HOA president to manufacture evidence against me." Thomas sighed. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Martinez. I'll continue investigating, but I want you to be prepared for the possibility that we may have to split liability on this one." "Split liability? She crashed into my parked car, allegedly," Thomas said. "I'll be in touch." The HOA board hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at 7. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the pool area with a meeting room that could hold about 30 people. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder full of documentation. Photos of my properly parked car, copies of the CC and R sections I was allegedly violating with my interpretations highlighted, and a timeline of Patricia's harassment. The board consisted of 5 people. Patricia sat at the center of the long table at the front of the room, flanked by Gregory Dunn on her right and 3 other members I recognized from seeing around the complex. To Patricia's left was Margaret Chen, a retired accountant who generally seemed reasonable. Next to her was Robert Torres, a middle-aged teacher who rarely spoke at meetings. At the far end sat Deborah King, a nervous woman in her 50s who always agreed with whatever Patricia said. About a dozen other residents were scattered in the audience chairs, mostly older folks who attended every board meeting like it was their entertainment for the week. Linda Watson sat in the front row, shooting me hostile looks. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. After dealing with some routine business about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules, she moved to my case. "Item 7 on tonight's agenda," Patricia announced. "Violation complaint against Mr. Harrison Martinez of Unit 17 for parking infractions and damage to common property." "Damage to common property," I interrupted. "What are you talking about? You hit my car in my parking spot. That's not common property." "Mr. Martinez, you'll have your opportunity to speak," Patricia said coldly. "Gregory, please present the board's findings." Gregory Dunn stood up, adjusting his glasses. He was a thin man with a receding hairline, and the kind of smug expression that suggested he enjoyed having power over people. On the morning of October 3rd, at approximately 6:45, HOA President Henderson was conducting a routine property inspection when her vehicle came into contact with Mr. Martinez's improperly parked Honda Accord. Photographic evidence shows that Mr. Martinez's vehicle was parked in violation of CC and R Section 4.3, extending beyond the acceptable parameters of parking space 17. He pulled up photos on a laptop connected to a projector. The images showed my car from various angles, and I had to admit they looked damning at first glance. In the photos, my passenger side tires appeared to be right on the line, maybe slightly over. "However," I said, standing up, "those photos are misleading. Section 4.3 applies to parking near emergency access points, not standard assigned spaces. The full text of the regulation makes that clear. Your interpretation is incorrect, Patricia said. The board has reviewed the regulations extensively with our attorney. Then let me see the attorney's opinion, I challenged. I have a right to see any legal opinions used to justify fines against me. Patricia's jaw tightened. The attorney-client privilege protects those communications. Not when you're using them to justify punitive actions, I shot back. If you're going to fine me and threaten to tow my vehicle based on a legal opinion, I have the right to review it. Margaret Chen spoke up for the first time. Actually, Harrison has a point. If we're relying on legal guidance to interpret the CC and articles, the residents should be able to see that guidance. We're supposed to operate transparently. The matter is not up for debate, Patricia snapped. We're here to determine Mr. Martinez's fine schedule and discuss restitution for the damage his negligence caused. My negligence, I raised my voice. You crashed into my parked car. This is completely backwards. Mr. Martinez, control yourself or you'll be removed from this meeting, Patricia warned. Robert Torres cleared his throat. I'd like to hear more about what happened the morning of the incident. Patricia, can you walk us through exactly what occurred? Patricia launched into her story, describing how she'd been driving slowly and carefully through the parking lot when my illegally positioned vehicle created an unavoidable obstacle. She made it sound like my parked car had jumped out at her. When it was my turn to present my side, I laid out the facts methodically. I explained that I'd been parking in that spot for 6 months without any issues. I showed my photos proving the car was within the lines. I pointed out that the security camera footage was conveniently unavailable, despite being the one piece of evidence that would definitively prove what happened. I also raised the question of why Patricia would fine me before the insurance investigation was complete. Because the violation occurred regardless of fault in the collision, Patricia said. Even if I had been entirely at fault for the accident, which I wasn't, you still violated parking regulations. Regulations that don't actually apply to my situation, I countered. Unless you can show me a legal opinion stating otherwise, which you refuse to do. The debate went on for over an hour. Margaret and Robert seemed genuinely conflicted, asking reasonable questions and reviewing the documents I'd provided. Gregory and Deborah backed Patricia unequivocally, dismissing everything I said. Finally, Patricia called for a vote on the fine. All in favor of upholding the $200 fine for parking violations, plus $50 per day escalation until compliance. Gregory and Deborah raised their hands immediately. Patricia raised hers a moment later. Robert hesitated but kept his hand down. Margaret also voted no. The motion passes 3-2, Patricia announced. Mr. Martinez, you have 48 hours to pay the fine and move your vehicle to a compliant position. What does a compliant position even mean? I asked. My car was compliant. What specifically do you want me to do differently? Park within the lines with at least 6 inches of clearance on all sides, Patricia said. That's physically impossible in a standard parking space, I protested. The spaces are 9 feet wide. My car is 6 feet wide. Even if I park perfectly centered, I'll only have 18 inches total clearance, which is 9 inches per side. But I can't park perfectly centered because the lines are there to divide spaces. If I give 6 inches on one side, I only have 3 inches on the other side. Then perhaps you need a smaller vehicle, Patricia said with a thin smile. This meeting is adjourned. I left the clubhouse feeling like I'd just been mugged. A few residents approached me afterward, including an older man named Frank who'd lived in the complex for 15 years. That was a hit job, son, Frank said. shaking his head. Patricia's been getting worse every year. She forced out 2 families last year with bogus violations and fines. Most people just pay and keep their heads down because fighting her costs more than it's worth. I'm not paying, I said firmly. This is wrong. I admire your spine, Frank said, but watch your back. She plays dirty. His words proved prophetic. The next morning, I found another violation notice on my door, this time for excessive noise disturbance. According to the notice, multiple complaints had been filed about loud music and voices coming from my unit between 10 and midnight the previous night. I'd been home alone watching TV at normal volume before going to bed at 10:30. More violation notices followed. My front door wreath was cited as an unapproved decoration. The small potted plant on my patio was flagged as unauthorized landscaping modification. Even my doormat was written up for being the wrong size according to some obscure regulation I'd never heard of. Each violation came with its own fine, starting at $50 and escalating. Within a week, Patricia claimed I owed the HOA over $1,000 in various penalties. It was harassment, plain and simple, and I was reaching my breaking point. I consulted with a lawyer, an attorney named Brian Foster who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in Phoenix, about a 30-minute drive from Scottsdale. Brian was in his mid-40s, gray hair at his temples, with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too much HOA nonsense. "This is one of the more aggressive cases I've seen," Brian said after reviewing my documentation. "The good news is that you have a strong case for harassment and improper fine assessment. The bad news is that litigation against an HOA is expensive and time-consuming." "How expensive?" I asked. "Could easily run you $10,000 to $15,000, maybe more if it goes to trial. Most HOA disputes settle before that point, but with someone like Patricia Henderson, who seems personally invested in punishing you, it could drag out." I felt my hope deflating. "I don't have that kind of money just lying around." "There is another option," Brian said. "You could file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They oversee HOA compliance with state law. If the department finds that your HOA is violating state statutes, they can impose sanctions and order corrective action. It's free to file a complaint, though the investigation can take months." "Do I have months?" I asked. "Patricia's threatening to tow my car and put a lien on my property for unpaid fines." "She can't actually tow your car without proper notice and procedure," Brian explained. "There's a statutory process she has to follow, including giving you 30 days to cure any violation before taking drastic action. As for the lien, yes, HOAs can place liens for unpaid assessments and fines, but again, there's a process. She can't just snap her fingers and steal your home." "But she can make my life hell in the meantime," I said. "Unfortunately, yes," Brian admitted. "Look, here's my advice. File the complaint with the state. Document everything Patricia does. Keep paying your regular HOA fees, but don't pay the violation fines. If she tries to tow your car or take other enforcement action, call me immediately and we'll seek an emergency injunction. In the meantime, stay squeaky clean. Don't give her any legitimate ammunition." I followed Brian's advice and filed a detailed complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate that same day. The online form was extensive, requiring me to outline every violation notice, every fine, and every action the HOA had taken. I attached dozens of pages of supporting documents, including photos, emails, and copies of the CC and Articus with my analysis. The confirmation email said I should expect a response within 60 to 90 days. 60 to 90 days of Patricia escalating her campaign against me. I tried to stay positive, but it was hard. My insurance company called with an update. State Farm had completed their investigation and determined that liability was split 50-50. They'd pay for half my repairs and half of Patricia's repairs, which meant I'd be out of pocket for my deductible plus whatever portion of her repairs her insurance didn't cover. "This is insane," I told Jennifer. "She crashed into my parked car. How can I be 50% at fault?" The investigator felt that without clear evidence and given the statements from witnesses about your parking position, a shared liability determination was most appropriate, Jennifer explained. "I'm sorry, Mr. Martinez. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. Can I appeal this decision?" "You can request a review by a supervisor, but I'll be honest with you. Split liability determinations in she said parking lot accidents are very common. Without video or independent witnesses, it's difficult to prove fault conclusively." I requested the review anyway, knowing it probably wouldn't help. Patricia had manipulated the entire situation perfectly. She damaged my car, turned it into an HOA violation case, gotten her friends to lie for her, and now even my insurance company was treating me like I was partially at fault. The harassment continued. I started getting emails from Patricia about other supposed violations, each one more ridiculous than the last. My trash cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though I'd brought them in immediately after the morning pickup. My car was taking up 2 spaces when I was parked normally. I was loitering in common areas when I checked my mail. Other residents started avoiding me. I learned through Frank that Patricia had been telling people I was a troublemaker who refused to follow community rules. She painted herself as the victim, constantly having to deal with my violations and complaints. People who didn't know the full story assumed I must be the problem. The isolation was wearing on me. I'd moved to Scottsdale hoping for a fresh start after my divorce, but instead I'd found myself in a different kind of nightmare. I threw myself into work, spending long hours coding and taking on extra projects just to keep my mind occupied. Then, 3 weeks after the accident, something shifted. I was getting my mail one evening when a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She was probably in her early 30s with long dark hair and an anxious expression. "Are you Harrison Martinez?" she asked quietly, glancing around like she was afraid of being seen. "Yes," I said. "Can I help you?" "My name is Natalie Stone. I live in Building C. Can we talk somewhere private?" We went back to my townhouse, and Natalie told me a story that made my blood run cold. She'd moved into Sunset Ridge Estates 2 years ago and had immediately run afoul of Patricia over a dispute about guest parking. Patricia had launched a campaign of violations and fines against Natalie that eventually forced her to pay over $3,000 in penalties. "But here's the thing," Natalie said. "About half of those violations never actually happened. Patricia would claim I'd done something, produce photos that looked real, and the board would just rubber stamp whatever she said. I couldn't prove the photos were fake or staged, so I had no defense." "Why didn't you fight back?" I asked. "I tried," Natalie said. "I hired a lawyer and everything. But it got so expensive, and the stress was affecting my health. Eventually, I just paid the fines to make it stop. I've kept my head down ever since, following every rule perfectly so she can't target me again." "Then why are you telling me this now?" Natalie pulled out her phone. "Because I saw what she did to your car, and I've been feeling guilty about not speaking up. I have something that might help you. Remember how the security camera covering your parking area was supposedly broken?" "Yeah, conveniently malfunctioning right when I needed it," I said bitterly. "It wasn't broken," Natalie said. "Or at least, It wasn't broken before the accident. I jog every morning and I pass by that camera on my route. The morning before your accident, October 2nd, I noticed the camera because a bird had built a nest on top of the housing. The red light was blinking, showing it was recording. The next morning, October 3rd, when I jogged by right after your accident happened, the camera was dark. No red light. My heart started pounding. Are you saying Patricia disabled the camera? I can't prove that, Natalie said carefully. But the timeline is suspicious. Camera working fine one day, accident happens the next morning, camera is suddenly broken and footage is corrupted. Plus, Patricia had been delaying approval for the repair, which Rosa told you. Why would she delay repairing a security camera unless she wanted it to stay broken? This is huge, I said. Would you be willing to provide a written statement about what you saw? Natalie hesitated. If I do this, Patricia will come after me again. She's vindictive. She's destroying my life, I said quietly. If we don't stop her, she'll just keep doing this to people. You said it yourself, she forced out 2 families last year. How many more people will she hurt? Natalie was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll write a statement. But Harrison, you need to understand something. Patricia has connections. Her brother is a lawyer, her best friend works for the property management company's parent corporation, and she's been HOA president for so long that she knows every trick in the book. Taking her on is going to be brutal. I don't care anymore, I said. She went too far. Natalie wrote out a detailed statement describing what she'd observed about the security camera, signed and dated it, and sent me a copy via email. I forwarded it immediately to Brian Foster and added it to my complaint file with the state. Brian called me the next morning, sounding excited. This is exactly what we needed. Tampering with security systems could be a criminal matter, not just an HOA dispute. Have you considered filing a police report? For what charge? I asked. The police already said the accident was a civil matter. Not for the accident, Brian said, for potential evidence tampering and fraud. If Patricia deliberately disabled that camera to prevent it from recording evidence, and then lied to insurance investigators about the circumstances of the accident, that's insurance fraud. It's a felony in Arizona. The idea of Patricia facing criminal charges sent a thrill through me. Would the police actually investigate that? They might, especially if you can tie it to the insurance fraud angle. The insurance companies have fraud investigation units too. State Farm would definitely be interested to know their investigation may have been based on fabricated evidence. I called Officer Ramsey first, the cop who'd taken the initial accident report. He listened to my story and said he'd pass it along to the fraud investigation unit. Then I called Jennifer at State Farm and explained Natalie's statement and my suspicions about the camera. That's concerning, Jennifer said. Let me forward this to our Special Investigations Unit. If there's evidence of fraud, they'll want to look into it. Things moved quickly after that. State Farm's fraud investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Detective Lisa Wu, called me 2 days later. She was actually a former police detective who now worked for the insurance company, and she sounded very interested in my case. I've reviewed the file, Detective Wu said. There are definitely some red flags. The convenient camera malfunction, the witness statements from known associates of Miss Henderson, the inconsistencies in her account of the accident. I'd like to interview you in person and get copies of all your documentation. We met at a coffee shop in Phoenix the next day. Detective Wu was in her 50s, Asian American, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I walked her through everything, showing her photos, emails, violation notices, and Natalie's statement. This is more extensive than I expected, Detective Wu said. Miss Henderson has a pattern of behavior that suggests she's abusing her position. The question is whether we can prove she deliberately committed fraud in this specific instance. What do you need to prove it? I asked. Ideally, we need evidence that she tampered with the camera or testimony from someone who knows she did it. We need to show that she knowingly made false statements to insurance investigators, and we need to demonstrate that she did these things with the intent to deceive for financial gain. Her friends who gave false witness statements, I said. If you interviewed them, would they crack? Detective Wu smiled slightly. People often aren't as loyal as they think they'll be when faced with potential criminal liability for making false statements. Let me do some digging. In the meantime, keep documenting everything Miss Henderson does. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for early November. By this point, Patricia was claiming I owed over $1,500 in various fines and fees. She'd sent me a formal notice that if I didn't pay within 10 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property and begin legal proceedings to foreclose. The foreclosure threat was probably a bluff, Brian assured me, but the lien was real. If I tried to sell or refinance, that lien would have to be dealt with, affecting my property value and my ability to use my home as an asset. I showed up at the November meeting prepared for war. I'd invited Brian to attend as my legal counsel, which was my right under the CC and accuses. Patricia's face went white when she saw him walk in with me. Mr. Martinez, you didn't notify the board that you'd be bringing an attorney, Patricia said tightly. The CC and accuses don't require advance notice, Brian replied smoothly. They simply grant residents the right to have representation at board meetings. I'm Brian Foster, and I'm here to ensure my client's rights are protected. The meeting was tense from the start. When Patricia tried to discuss my outstanding fines, Brian objected, citing procedural irregularities in how the fines had been assessed. He pointed out that many of the violations hadn't gone through the proper notice and cure process required by Arizona law. Furthermore, Brian said, we have evidence that suggests the initial fine stemming from the October 3rd accident was based on a misinterpretation of the CC and accuses, possibly deliberately so. We're requesting that all fines be suspended pending an independent review by a qualified attorney not retained by Miss Henderson personally. The board has full authority to interpret the CC and accuses, Gregory Dunn sputtered. We don't need to justify our decisions to you. Actually, under Arizona Revised Statutes Title 33, Chapter 9, HOA boards have a fiduciary duty to act in good faith and in the best interests of all homeowners, Brian countered. Targeted harassment of a specific resident doesn't meet that standard. We're prepared to file suit if necessary. Margaret Chen spoke up. I've been uncomfortable with how this situation has been handled. I think an independent review is a reasonable request. Robert Torres nodded. I agree. This has gone beyond a simple parking dispute. If there's any possibility we've been misapplying the rules, we need to know. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but she could see she was losing control of the board. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. We'll seek an independent legal opinion. But Mr. Martinez's fines remain in effect until that review is complete. We'll accept that on the condition that no enforcement action is taken during the review period, Brian said. No liens, no towing, no additional fines. The board voted on it, and this time Margaret, Robert, and even Deborah voted yes. Patricia and Gregory were outvoted. Patricia adjourned the meeting quickly, clearly furious. As we left, Linda Watson hissed at me, "You're going to regret this." I ignored her, but Brian made a note of the comment. The following week, Detective Wu called with an update. I interviewed Linda Watson and Gregory Dunn separately. Watson stuck to her story initially, but when I explained that providing false statements in an insurance investigation could be prosecuted as fraud, she became less certain. Dunn folded immediately. He admitted that Patricia had asked him to support her version of events and that he never actually witnessed your car parked improperly. So they lied, I said, feeling vindicated. Dunn claims he thought he was just backing up a friend and didn't realize it was a legal matter. Watson is still maintaining she saw what she said she saw, but her story has inconsistencies. More importantly, I pulled records from the security company that maintains the cameras. According to their logs, the camera covering your parking area was functioning normally until 6:15 on the morning of October 3rd. At 6:17, the system shows the camera went offline due to what was logged as a manual disconnect. My pulse raced. Manual disconnect. Someone physically unplugged it or disabled it through the control panel, Detective Wu said. The security system requires an access code to make manual changes. I subpoenaed the access records. At 6:12 that morning, someone used Patricia Henderson's access code to log into the system. She did it, I breathed. She deliberately disabled the camera before hitting my car. It looks that way, Detective Wu said. I'm referring this to the Scottsdale Police Department for criminal investigation. Between the camera tampering and the false statements to investigators, there's probable cause for insurance fraud charges. Things escalated rapidly after that. The police obtained a warrant and interviewed Patricia, who denied everything. She claimed someone must have stolen her access code. But when investigators examined her computer, they found search history from the night before the accident looking up information about security camera blind spots and insurance claim procedures. The evidence was damning. Patricia was arrested in mid-November and charged with insurance fraud, tampering with evidence, and filing a false police report. The local news picked up the story, running headlines about an HOA president accused of crashing into a resident's car and then trying to blame the victim. The fallout was swift. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. Margaret Chen took over as interim president. The board also voted to rescind all fines against me and to issue a formal apology. Patricia's arrest became a bigger story when other residents started coming forward with their own complaints about her abusive tactics. The investigation expanded to look at whether she'd embezzled HOA funds or committed other fraudulent acts during her tenure. Financial records showed irregularities that suggested she'd been padding vendor contracts and pocketing kickbacks. My civil case against Patricia for the car damage was straightforward once the criminal case was underway. Her insurance company, faced with clear evidence that she'd lied to them, denied her claim and pursued restitution from her personally. State Farm reversed their liability determination and covered my repairs in full, then joined Allstate in suing Patricia for their costs. The criminal trial was held in March of the following year. I attended every day, watching as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out the evidence. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd acted in what she believed was the HOA's best interest. But the jury wasn't buying it. They'd seen the evidence of the camera tampering, heard the testimony about the false statements, and read the incriminating search history. Patricia Henderson was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison, with another 3 years of supervised probation upon release. She was also ordered to pay restitution totaling over $40,000 to cover everyone's insurance costs, legal fees, and damages. As for me, I finally got some peace. Margaret Chen turned out to be a reasonable HOA president who focused on actual community maintenance rather than power trips. The board implemented new rules requiring transparency and accountability, including mandatory video recording of all board meetings and a formal appeals process for any violations. I got my car repaired, and it looked good as new. More importantly, I got my life back. I could park in my assigned spot without fear, could put a doormat outside my door, could live in my home without constantly looking over my shoulder for the next bogus violation notice. Frank invited me to a neighborhood barbecue that summer, where I met dozens of residents who shared their own relief that Patricia was gone. Natalie Stone thanked me for having the courage to fight back when she hadn't been able to. We became friends and eventually started dating. The whole experience taught me some hard lessons about HOAs and the dangers of giving anyone unchecked power. It also taught me about the importance of documentation, persistence, and finding good people willing to stand up for what's right. Brian Foster only charged me half his normal fee, saying that cases like mine were why he specialized in HOA law. "Someone has to protect people from petty tyrants," he said. "I'm just glad we got her before she ruined more lives." I stayed in Sunset Ridge Estates. Some people asked if I'd considered moving after everything that happened, but I refused to be driven out of my home. This was my place now, and I'd fought for it. The townhouse that used to be Patricia's went on the market a few months after her conviction. She couldn't afford the mortgage anymore with the restitution payments and legal fees. A young couple with a baby bought it. Nice people who attended their first HOA meeting nervously, until they realized the horror stories they'd heard about Sunset Ridge Estates were from the old regime. I ran into Linda Watson one day at the community pool. She tried to apologize, saying she'd just been trying to help a friend and didn't understand the legal ramifications. I accepted her apology but made it clear we weren't going to be friendly. Some betrayals cut too deep. Gregory Dunn resigned from the HOA board and kept a very low profile after his testimony at Patricia's trial. Robert Torres took over as board treasurer and worked with Margaret to clean up the financial mess Patricia had left behind. They discovered she'd been skimming money for years, inflating expense reports and approving contracts with companies that gave her kickbacks. The total amount embezzled was estimated at over $70,000. The property management company fired several employees who'd been too cozy with Patricia, including the supervisor who'd been friends with her. Rosa kept her job and was promoted to senior manager for having the integrity to try to help residents even when it meant going against Patricia's wishes. The security company upgraded all the cameras and implemented new safeguards preventing anyone from manually disabling cameras without proper authorization and documented cause. The new system sent automatic alerts to both the management company and the security firm if any camera went offline. My insurance premiums actually went down after the case was resolved, since I was no longer considered at fault for an accident. State Farm sent me a letter thanking me for helping expose fraud in their system. Apparently, Patricia had filed suspicious claims before, but without proof, they hadn't been able to act on their suspicions. The Arizona Department of Real Estate used my case as an example in new training materials for HOA board members about proper procedures and ethical conduct. My complaint, along with similar ones from other Sunset Ridge residents, led to new state regulations governing HOA enforcement actions and requiring better oversight of board activities. I framed the formal apology letter from the HOA board and hung it in my home office, not out of spite, but as a reminder. A reminder that standing up to bullies is hard and scary, but sometimes necessary. A reminder that documentation and truth eventually prevail over lies and manipulation. And a reminder that even when systems seem stacked against you, there are good people who will help if you reach out. Natalie and I got engaged a year after Patricia's conviction. We talked about moving in together, maybe buying a house outside the HOA system entirely. But we both agreed that we'd earned our peace at Sunset Ridge Estates. This was our community now, improved by the fact that we'd helped make it better. The parking spot where Patricia crashed into my car became something of a legend in the community. New residents would hear the story and ask to see the spot where the infamous incident occurred. I'd smile and point it out. My Honda Accord always parked perfectly within the lines. On the 2-year anniversary of the accident, Frank organized a little celebration at the clubhouse. It was tongue-in-cheek, but also genuine. A celebration of community, of justice, and of the fact that we'd all survived Patricia Henderson's reign of terror and come out stronger. Margaret gave a speech about lessons learned and the importance of good governance. Robert talked about financial responsibility and transparency. I said a few words about the power of standing up for yourself, even when it's hard. But the best moment came when Natalie stood up and said, "Harrison's story inspired me to stop being afraid. It showed me that one person willing to fight can make a difference." Since Patricia's been gone, I've served on 2 committees, helped organize community events, and actually enjoyed living here. That's what our HOA should be about. Not fear and fines, but community and cooperation. Everyone applauded, and I felt a sense of completion. The nightmare that started with the crunch of metal on that October morning had transformed into something positive. Patricia Henderson had tried to use her power to destroy me, but instead, she'd brought the community together and ultimately destroyed herself. My parents flew in from California to visit and couldn't believe the story when I told them the full version. My dad, always practical, asked why I hadn't just paid the fines and moved on with my life. I explained that it was never really about the money. It was about the principle, about not letting bullies win, about standing up for what was right even when it cost me. My mom understood immediately. She dealt with her own workplace bully years ago and knew the toll it took. She was proud of me for seeing it through, even during the dark moments when I'd wanted to give up. Work had been understanding throughout the ordeal, though I'd been careful not to let my personal drama affect my professional performance. My boss actually told me that he'd been through his own HOA nightmare and respected how I'd handled mine. It led to a promotion and a raise, his way of acknowledging that someone who could navigate that kind of pressure would handle client crises well too. The legal bills had been substantial, even with Brian's discount. Between attorney fees, court costs, and taking time off work for hearings and trial days, the whole ordeal probably cost me close to $8,000. But I considered it money well spent. Some things are worth fighting for, and your home, your peace of mind, and your dignity are at the top of that list. Patricia's eventual release from prison was still a year away when Natalie and I got married in a small ceremony at her resort in Sedona. We invited close friends and family, including Frank, Rosa, and even Brian Foster. Margaret sent a beautiful gift with a note saying how happy she was that something good had come from such a difficult situation. We honeymooned in Hawaii, and for 2 glorious weeks, I didn't think about HOAs, parking spots, or Patricia Henderson at all. I just enjoyed being with the woman I loved, swimming in the ocean, and appreciating the simple pleasure of a life lived without fear. When we returned to Scottsdale and pulled into our parking spot at Sunset Ridge Estates, I felt truly at home for the first time since moving in. The complex looked the same, but everything felt different. The oppressive atmosphere Patricia had created was gone, replaced by an actual sense of community. The newer residents had no memory of the bad old days and couldn't quite understand why some of us got emotional about things like HOA meetings running smoothly or violation notices being issued fairly and only when necessary. But those of us who'd lived through Patricia's regime appreciated every peaceful day. I stayed involved in the HOA, serving on the Architectural Review Committee and later as a board member. I wanted to make sure we never went back to the way things were. Power corrupts, and HOA power corrupts absolutely if there aren't good people willing to provide oversight and accountability. Years later, I still drive that same Honda Accord with the repaired passenger door. Sometimes people ask why I don't upgrade to something newer, and I tell them the car has sentimental value. It's a reminder of everything I went through and everything I learned. Besides, it runs great, and the repairs made it look as good as new. Natalie jokes that I should write a book about the whole experience, a cautionary tale about HOA horror stories. Maybe someday I will. For now, I'm content knowing that my story had a happy ending, that justice was served, and that Patricia Henderson can't hurt anyone else for a long time. The last I heard, Patricia was working in the prison library, teaching other inmates basic computer skills. I hope she's using her time to reflect on her actions and become a better person. I don't hate her anymore. The anger burned itself out during the trial. Now I just feel a mixture of pity and relief. Pity that she threw away her life and freedom over petty grievances and power trips. Relief that she can't hurt my community anymore. Frank passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 83, about 3 years after Patricia's trial. At his memorial service, held in the Sunset Ridge clubhouse, person after person stood up to talk about what a good neighbor and friend he'd been. I spoke about how he'd encouraged me to stand up to Patricia when I'd been ready to give up. His support had made all the difference. The new generation of board members includes people who never knew Patricia, who have only heard the stories. They sometimes make decisions I disagree with, and we have healthy debates about budgets and rules and community priorities. But it's all done in good faith, with transparency, and with respect for everyone's rights. That's what an HOA should be. My passenger side parking space neighbor is a retired teacher named Gloria who gardens obsessively and brings me vegetables from her patio garden all summer. We've never had a single dispute about parking, noise, or anything else. We just wave hello, chat about the weather, and respect each other's space. It's gloriously boring in the best possible way. On quiet mornings when I'm getting in my car to drive to work, I sometimes pause and remember that October morning when everything changed. The sound of the crash, the shock of Patricia's audacity, the fear that she might actually get away with it. And then I remember how it all turned out, how truth and justice and community prevailed in the end. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick. There were moments of doubt, moments of rage, moments when I wanted to just pay her off and move somewhere else. But I'm glad I fought. I'm glad I stood my ground. Because now I live in a place that feels like home, with neighbors who have become friends, in a community that learned hard lessons and came out better for them. Harrison Martinez's battle with HOA Karen Patricia Henderson became something bigger than one man's fight against injustice. It became a catalyst for change, proof that standing up to bullies matters, and a reminder that home is worth fighting for. And every time I park my perfectly repaired Honda Accord in parking spot number 17, within the lines and without fear, I'm reminded that I won.